by the tree of life. Of course, Satan is in the tree of life, listening as this unfolds, right? So near grows death to life, whatever death is. Adam, of course, doesn't know what death is. He's just been told, you eat from the tree. Technically, you touch the tree, and you will die. Some dreadful thing, no doubt. For well thou knowest, God hath pronounced it death to taste that tree, the only sign of our obedience, left among so many signs of power and rule conferred upon us, and dominion given over all other creatures that possess earth, air, and sea. In other words, he says, we've only got one thing we can't do in all of Eden. Amazing. Continue. Then let us not think hard when easy prohibition, who enjoy free leave so large to all things else, and choice unlimited of manifold delights. But let us ever praise him and extol his bounty, following our delightful task to prune these growing plants and tend these flowers, which were toilsome, yet with thee were sweet. Adam points out that I don't mind the work as long as I'm with you. It will be, in Milton's view, Adam's infatuation with Eve that will ultimately lead to Adam deciding to also eat the fruit of the forbidden tree that he's just mentioned. It's not hard. We're free. We're totally free, with the one exception, we're not to eat from the one tree, which we've been told will bring death, whatever that is. Now Eve's reply, to whom, thus, Eve replied. Now again, just to be clear, as we know, because we read the Genesis 3 account, none of this is in the Genesis 3 story. None of this is in the Genesis 2 story. Milton is inventing a way to talk about what it must have been like for the very first humans, according to, again, the Genesis 3 story, Adam and Eve, to exchange conversation with each other. Now, Eve. What does she say? And again, some of you are going to get really frustrated right away because it's clear that Milton is creating an Eve that's definitely going to know her place. Take a look at how it plays out. O thou, for whom and from whom I was formed, flesh of thy flesh, and without whom am to no end, my guide and head. What thou hast said is just and right, for we to him indeed all praises owe and daily thanks. I, chiefly, who enjoys so far the happier lot, enjoying thee preeminent by so much odds, while thou, like consort to thyself, canst nowhere find. In other words, she says, I'm even more indebted to God because I have you. And then she remembers what it was like when she first was formed. That day, I oft remember, when from sleep I first awakened, and found myself reposed under a shade, on flowers, much wondering where and what I was, whence thither brought, and how. Two observations. One, she wakes up and she's in the dark. We're going to remember, of course, Plato here in a little bit with a plantain leaf being mentioned, and Plato and plantain have an etymological similarity. Number two, she says, the moment I awoke, I was already asking questions, which of course will be her downfall. Like Satan, she likes to ask questions. And what I was, and whence, thither brought, and how. Not distant far from thence a murmuring sound of waters issued from a cave and spread into a liquid plain, then stood unmoved, pure as the expanse of heaven. In other words, she heard some water running. I thither went with unexperienced thought. We'll obviously talk about the songs of innocence and songs of experience of, Blake. And laid me down on the green bank to look into the clear, smooth lake that to me seemed another sky. As I bent down to look, just opposite a shape within the watery gleam appeared, bending to look on me. I stared back. It stared back. But pleased, I soon returned. This is the Ovid story, of course, in Metamorphoses of Narcissus and that infatuation with self which leads to death. Pleased it returned as soon as with answering looks of sympathy and love. There I had fixed mine eyes till now, and pined with vain desire, had not a voice thus warned me. In other words, she says, I would have sat there looking at the beauty of myself, but a voice warns me. What thou seest, what thou art, what there thou seest, fair creature, is thyself. With thee it came and goes, but follow me, and I will bring thee where no shadow stays thy coming and thy soft embraces. He whose image thou art, him thou shalt enjoy inseparably thine. To him shall bear multitudes like thyself, and thence be called mother of human race. What could I do but follow straight? We're back to the notion of straight versus invisible. Straight, if you just follow straight all the way through, we're going to see in a little bit that sex is straight. If you follow straight all the way through this book, it's quite fascinating. Invisibly thus led, till I espied thee, she says, the first time I saw you, Adam. Fair indeed, and tall, under a plantain. Again, Plato and plantain have etymological similarities. If I had more time, I'd go into this. I'm going to let you kind of figure some of this out for yourself. Yet, methought less fair, she says about Adam. You weren't as beautiful as me. Less winning, soft, less amiable, mild than that smooth, watery image. Back I turned, then following criedst aloud, Return, fair Eve, whom fliest thou? In other words, she's called back with a series of, with a question. Whom thou fliest, of him thou art, his flesh, his bone, to give thee being I lent out of my side to thee, Adam will say to her. I gave you a part of me so that you could exist. Nearest my heart, the rib. Substantial life to have thee by my side. Henceforth an individual soulless, dear. Part of my soul, I seek thee, and thee claim my other half. You complete me. Of course, this is again that notion of the Greek idea as expressed in Plato's Symposium, that at before birth, human, male, female are like a sphere and then severed, and like magnets try to find their way back. We mentioned this, of course, in that Sonnet 116, Shakespeare's Sonnet 116 lecture. Right? With that, thy gentle hand seized mine. Now, this hand thing, we're going to talk, we've already mentioned this, hands and hand, all the way through. The trajectory of all of the events that happen in Paradise Lost can be chronicled or tracked or mapped by this hand stuff, right? I yielded. And I mean, you see this tension, right, already in regards, I yielded, right? And from that time, see how beauty is excelled by manly grace and wisdom, which alone is truly fair. Eve finishes by saying, I understood in a moment that men are way more superior to women. I figured that out, and it blew my mind. The end of the speech. Well, at the conclusion of this speech, we're told that Satan is watching. Line 505. Sight hateful, sight tormenting. Thus these two imparadised. It's an interesting word. Imparadised in one another's arms. The happier Eden shall enjoy their fill of bliss on bliss, while I to hell am thrust, where neither joy nor love, but fierce desire among our other torments, not the least, still unfulfilled, with pain of longing pines. It's an interesting idea. I had a student once who pointed this out. You know, I don't have a girl, and I watch all these guys at the school have a girl, and it eats at me. I hate it. But now I read this and I go, oh, well, that's kind of satanic, to not want to allow people to have a good time, to have fun, to always wanting to kind of make sure that, you know, I feel bad. I'm angered at other people's joy. Satan, of course, feeling this way. And then the rhetorical questions will begin. He says, still unfulfilled with pain of longing pines. Yet, let me not forget what I have gained from their own mouths. In other words, I've learned something important. All is not theirs, it seems. One fatal tree there stands of knowledge called, forbidden to them to taste. Knowledge? Forbidden? Suspicious? Reasonless? Why should their Lord envy them that? Can it be a sin to know? Can it be death? And do they only stand by ignorance? Is that their happy state? The proof of their obedience and their faith? Now let's just pause for a moment. Of course, these are famous, famous lines. Again, back to the theodicy question. Is it, notice again, a sin to know? Is knowledge good or is it bad? And why would God want them to remain ignorant? I mean, we think about all the different kind of power paradigms. I mean, here's one that we can think about right away. Think about the fact that there has always been, in the history of the patriarchy, prohibitions against what? Education of whom? Right. women, and of course slaves. And we point this out, of course, in our lectures on American thought. In the Deep South, prohibitions against teaching your slaves how to read. Why? No prohibition against teaching your mules how to read. The argument that those of the South who were slaveholders saw their slaves and mules as equals, of course, belies the question, why wasn't there a law against teaching the mules how to read then? Because within that law is an understanding. If you allow women and slaves to be educated, they might begin to think for themselves, and the minute they do that, this paradigm might be challenged. To continue, O fair foundation laid whereon to build their ruin. Hence I will excite their minds with more desire to know, and to reject envious commands invented with design to keep them low, whom knowledge might exalt equal with gods, aspiring to be such. Think about the word aspiring and inspiring. They taste and die. What likelier can ensue? But first with narrow search I must walk around this garden, and no corner leave unspied. A chance but chance may lead where I may meet some wandering spirit of heaven by fountain side, or in thick shade retired from him to draw what further could be learned. And then he says it to Adam and Eve. It's what we would call an aside in Shakespearean drama. Live while ye may, ye happy pair, enjoy till I return. Short pleasures for long woes are to succeed. So saying, his proud step he scornfully turned, at line 535, 536. Well, at line 549, we're told that Gabriel, who is one of the archangels of Hebrew biblical tradition, along with Michael, Uriel, and Raphael. Gabriel, who is the heavenly messenger, for those of you who know your Bibles at Luke 1:19 and at Daniel 8. Gabriel is sitting there and watching and guarding, and Uriel at line 561 will tell him, Uriel gliding on a sunbeam, it's a fun word picture. I saw Satan, and I'm really concerned. Line 576, Gabriel will speak and say, I'm gonna go look for him in the search. Line 610, and now I'm hurrying to finish our level 1. Adam and Eve now are ready to go to bed. And you can tell that Milton is a little bit unsettled by some of the stuff he's about to write. He wants to show prelapsarian sex, but he's not exactly sure how to do it as a Puritan writer. And he wants to try his best. Fair consort, line 610, Adam will say to Eve, the hour of night and all things now retire to rest, mind us of like repose. It's nighttime, it's time to go to bed. At line 634, Eve will speak more of this same worshipful kind of language. She says at line 634, my author and disposer, what thou biddest unargued, I obey. So God ordains. God is thy law, thou mine. To know no more is woman's happiest knowledge and her praise. Whoa. And then she goes into a praise of Adam. I can't read it all, but it's amazing. I forget all time, all seasons and their change, all please alike. Well, we immediately think of Browning's wife, Elizabeth Barrett. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. And here it is, this tribute, right? She finishes this up over at line 656, where she finishes and says, all of the amazing things of Eden, without thee, they're not sweet. How can they be sweet? She asks in a rhetorical question. But then she asks, what are these things, the stars? And Adam gets to give an astrology lesson. In other words, at line 656, Adam's able to say to Eve, let me tell you, let me teach you a thing or two. And then at line 689, thus talking, hand in hand alone they passed on to their blissful bower. We have the description of the bower. Interestingly, we have the mention of Pandora at line 714. We don't want to miss this. The idea, of course, is that Eve is more lovely than Pandora. But don't miss it. Milton is definitely making an observation here that cannot be missed. In the same way that the Greeks will blame all of the evils on the world because Pandora's curiosity, she had to open that stupid box, and hope was the only thing left. We have the mention of Eve as well, along with Pandora. And then we have, starting at line 736, Milton's apostrophe to sex, and more particularly to good sex, not evil sex, if you will. He even mentions, for example, hail wedded love, mysterious law, true source of human offspring, sole propriety in paradise of all things common else. And then he has an observation about adulterous lust. That's kind of an interesting apostrophe here, in which he talks about the notion of real love. In golden shaft employs here lights, his constant lamp. Not, he says, in the bought smile of harlots, loveless, joyless, unendeared, casual fruition. Not in court amours, mixed dance, or wanton mask, or midnight ball. In other words, he says, this pair enjoys ultimately what all wedded people want to enjoy. And then he finishes, sleep on, blessed pair, at line 774, 775. And oh, yet happiest if you seek no happier state, and know to know no more. In other words, no, 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 no. 4 of them, right? You get a sense that Milton is a little uncomfortable here, talking about what it is that he is showing to us, and yet at the same time, notice this use of the word knowledge. We're thinking, of course, of the 1611 King James Version of the Bible, and Adam knew Eve, and she conceived and bore a son, and they named him Cain. The word knowledge is often rendered sexual knowledge. And it's always interesting when we ask the question, as we will in a little bit again, about Blake's Songs of Innocence, Songs of Experience, and what is it that makes the difference between innocence and experience. Often we immediately think, don't we, of sexuality and the whole notion of what it means to change through the act of sex, sexual appreciation, whatever. At line 788, we have 2 angels, Ithuriel and Cephon, both kind of created by Milton, although Cephon is mentioned in biblical text. And they are out searching to try and find Satan. And we're told at line 800, Satan, squatting like a toad close at the ear of Eve, essaying by his devilish art to reach the organs of her fancy, and with them forge illusions as he lists, phantasms and dreams. Freud obviously liking these lines as he himself was working through this notion of interpretation of dreams. Discontented thoughts, bad dreams are of the devil, if you will, right? Of course, think about that whole notion of Satan squatting as a toad. In your junior year, of course, you study Crucible. Remember that one? About dancing in the woods and then having the pot there, and remember that comment about was there a toad or was there a frog? And remember Abigail says that jumped in the equation of toads and frogs with satanic powers. Well, finally the end, and we'll get very quickly now to this one. The end of the book will finish with a series of insults because Satan is caught, and he can't believe that they don't recognize him when they do catch him. At line 827, Satan is caught, and he says it. Know ye not me then? Said Satan, filled with scorn. Know ye not me? How can you not know who I am? Of course, he's changed, right? Ye knew me once, no mate for you, there sitting where ye durst not soar. Not to know me augurs yourself unknown, the lowest of your throng. He starts insulting the angels. Or if you know, why ask ye, and superfluous began your message, like to end as much in vain. In other words, you don't want any of this. Which is interesting, because that's exactly what he said to Death, you'll remember, before sin, his daughter, had to break them up. Satan is a scrapper. Like Achilles, he always wants to fight. Finally, at the very end, we have a very interesting exchange that I wish I had more time and I would read it entirely. It's fascinating. Between Gabriel and Satan. So you've got Gabriel the archangel going up against Satan, and they're ready to go at it. And in fact, they are going to fight. When out of the sky at line 997, out of heaven, hung forth in heaven is golden scales. And there's these scales, which immediately, for us as readers, we think about that passage in Iliad 8 and again in Iliad 22, right? About the scales that are weighing, Zeus weighing. In Iliad 8, by the way, 69 to 72, and Iliad 22, 209 and following. And then in Virgil's Aeneid in Book 12, line 725 to 727, we got the scales again. And of course, biblical readers will think of Belshazzar in Daniel 5:27. You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Of course, think about Belshazzar, B-E-L, right? And the whole satanic thing. So Milton loves to end always with this. Last time it was on the top of Nephates, and now here it is with this Belshazzar observation. The scales, interestingly, the scales will lead to Satan being allowed to leave. Why? Again, we're back to the theodicy question. Why? I mean, you have Satan. Just put him in hell, don't allow him to ever get out, and then Adam and Eve can live in Eden in paradise for the rest of their life, knowing that they shouldn't touch the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Well, let's now finish very quickly with some level 2A observations, messages, and themes. Of course, the first one, how to describe utopia, perfection. We think of Plato's Republic right away, and then of course dystopian novels. We obviously in our middle school read The Giver or The Anthem, and then of course in high school 1984, Orwell's 84, the way to critique notions of utopia. And of course the question, why does it always go bad? We think of Voltaire's Candide, and you'll remember that Candide at one moment makes it to El Dorado, but he can't stay. Is there something inherent in us that somehow cannot abide the perfection, and we got to get out? Number 2, think of the propaganda and the ways in which people keep power, especially this notion of the patriarchy. I'd like you to write down some dates, and I want you to just think about these dates for yourself. These are all titles that you are familiar with. 1476, think of Chaucer's Wife of Bath. Remember in her prologue, she says it. Well, of course Eve gets blamed for all of the bad stuff that happens in the world. Who wrote the book? It was all written by men. Let Eve tell that story about the Garden of Eden and the forbidden fruit, and I guarantee you it would be told from a different perspective. That, of course, was radical in 1476 when Chaucer publishes Canterbury Tales, and of course it's radical today even still. Think about the next date, 1600. Hamlet will say it in Hamlet. Frailty, thy name is woman. Well, he's mad at his mom, he's mad at Ophelia. Then, of course, in 1667, we have, a few years later, Milton's Eve. You are the most amazing man. You're everything to me. Then think about 1892 and Gilman's Yellow Wallpaper.